So, Gary has made an exhibition which thankfully has quite a lot to talk about. So we should probably just get straight into it. And my first feeling, kind of when you initially encounter the text pieces, and specifically the panels, is it's quite shocking how emotionally raw they are. It's quite kind of surprising in a way. And the text seems to be directed very specifically to one person. And you feel as you walk around, okay, this is to somebody. And then you begin to feel, oh, it's to me. And then as it goes on, it becomes more ambiguous. And so I really think that all the I's, the me's, and the you's in the text dissolve into an us, a more collective humanity, if you like. And really the question is, I mean, this us, I think, includes the author. So my question kind of is, who is talking to who in the text?
So I think, and in the drawings you'll see there is a lot of, I don't know if you don't love me, you know, I want you, you and me, like Dougie said, us, we, you, I. And I think that who I'm speaking to is the author or the narrator or whatever. When you use that so much, it does dissolve into a kind of us. So it kind of dilutes itself in a way. And initially when I'm making these pieces, they're very emotional and very personal. But they hopefully transcend this because there is always a you and me. And I'm talking to you and it kind of reflects back on itself in a way, so that you're talking to me. There is a constant, almost kind of personal, journalistic thing, but I think it does lessen itself, like lessen EN itself, the more there is. How do you feel about that?
I mean, you did it, so you would know better.
But I don't know about that. We might contest that in this talk.
I see that a little differently because to me, I see that you hit upon a series of symbols or words or language, however you exactly want to describe it, that is so universal that when you're reading it or looking at it, you can be on either side of that discussion.
Exactly.
We all know it, we all felt it, we've all been there. So you can be anywhere. And I think that merges, not that we like to talk about people merging, but that merges both persons or more than one person, whoever exists in that conversation.
Yeah, exactly, and then that's where I think specifically, in a way, maybe those are a kind of key into the rest of the work, this idea of a universality about it. So I'm talking to you, but I'm not talking to anyone in particular, it's you and you and you. So it's everybody.
But, you know, the other side of that universality, I think, is also there, Gary. You know, on one level it's universal, as Ron said, yeah, we've all been there, we've all had these feelings or experiences, but on the other side, if I think about it from the point of view of who the I is in particular and who the creator is, I also sense a kind of fragmentation of identity too, rather than it all coming together to make a kind of universal experience. I also feel that it's maybe a darker side too, like where there's an I who is an individual, but who is kind of cracking up and breaking up into different personalities, and we're watching that play out on the panels. So.
That's really interesting. The fuck us both piece, which is one of my personal favourites. But I know that came from a work on paper from a few years ago, but there's even, in something so direct, there's even ambiguity there, because you're thinking, well, who is he speaking to? Is he speaking to an unknown to us individual? Then is he speaking to me? And then my thought was, is he speaking to his own divided personality? So this notion of autobiography and fiction, it's not really an either-or situation. It's both things coexisting. And for me, that's what's very appealing about the work, is that you're left unsure You're left unsure whether it's a genuine confession
Well,
or despair.
It kind of has to be, and like to talk about this, to go back to the universality and the cracking up kind of thing, the whole notion of split personality or some kind of sort of controlled schizophrenia or something is, I shy away from that word because it's such a heavy word. But so I feel that it's more like a day by day, hour by hour aspect of one's personality or one's like kind of emotions, you know, like a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, they go on and they make up a whole. And then, so then you don't know who the I is, and then you sometimes somehow become the I. You don't know who the us is. You know, I could be directly speaking to you saying, fuck us both. You know, we fucked up, we had something, it went. Or it could be an entirely different scenario, like, fuck us both. You know, for it to remain open like that is important for me because the viewer should be able to bring their own feelings and their own experiences and in a way kind of complete the work in the way they feel. But you might come up the stairs and encounter the maze, but you might go straight to the wall, or you might go in the maze, or you might walk around the pillar and go in that way. So then to open up the potential, even in a physical way, that you can experience what I'm trying to do is kind of open-ended. So they become like a friend of mine who was visiting when the work was being done. He really pinpointed it. We were talking about literature, which is an influence in the work that we may cover a bit later on, but he read it as these are pages in a book and you don't really know who wrote the book or what order the pages are in, so you kind of complete the book chapter by chapter, page by page, and that's what I'm kind of trying to do, to open it up so that there is a completion, so that there is an open-endedness. I'm not trying to like lecture or hector anyone. If it does that, it's closed off, and then to me, it's what I'm interested in has failed at that point.
Now, just talking about pages in the book, I'd like to literally talk about the process of making and the difference between making the works on paper and making the panels, because I know that they're quite different. And the process of making the works on paper is a kind of careful one of editing and redrawing and refining an initial emotional response, it seems. And with the panels, the whole process is visible. It's layer upon layer, and you're it's all there. And I was really interested to know if that, making the panels and knowing that was going to be visible, made you feel vulnerable, or more vulnerable and less in control, maybe, than you were with the works on paper.
Well, so drawing is such a big part of, and that's like my typical practice and my typical scale. And I was always intrigued, for the drawings for a moment, let me talk about that. So I'm making them, and there's the process of making them, like you're saying, like going back and editing. Fergus likes to use the word immediacy, and I think it's when we're talking about my work and when he's coming by to look at what's going on, and it's interesting because you see the nail polished love hearts. So I'll make 30 or 40 of them at one time, and some just don't make it, some of them stink, and some of them are great. But out of a group of maybe like 30 or 40, you get 3, maybe 2 that really get to where I'm trying to go. So there is an immediacy in that, because each one is absolutely immediate, and there's a going back and looking over it. And some drawings first time happen, again, that immediacy, and some are way more involved, especially the collage pieces. But again, that's another element of my practice when I don't really necessarily feel inspired or feel like, I'm in some kind of groove or something. It's all about working. For me, I like to keep working, I like to keep making it. So I would give myself these tasks of buying newspapers and old magazines and second-hand books and ripping the 13 out of the page and going to chapter 13 and, you know, ripping out the number 13. And then I would find sometimes that it wasn't the numeral, it was the word. So the Salvation Army would get 25 cents out of me for nothing for those paperbacks. They're very intimate, obviously, and they're very immediate and close to you because of the scale. They draw you in, you have to see what that text says. So to see what the text says, you have to be there. And I was always interested to know what it would maybe feel like if the work on a physical level, I mean, a lot of this, the content is very emotional and very pushes back at you. But what if it could physically push back at you as well? And I had the idea to make these screens and to make them like a labyrinth, like they would pull you around. The same way that the drawings have to pull you in, the panels can pull you around the space. But again, going back to something I said earlier, as they're pulling you around the space, you're making up a narrative. You're going on a journey physically and emotionally and psychologically.
Gary, we're talking about this in terms of process, the difference between the works on paper and the difference in the screens, but even as you're talking about it, it's bringing us back to this question of intimacy and, you know, kind of a very visceral presence that you have in the work. But, you know, made me want to ask you kind of really directly, how much should we consider this work autobiographical in the direct sense of the word, that it's your trauma, your feelings, your experiences, and how much is that a kind of created quasi-autobiography where you're almost a kind of persona that you're expressing through this? Because the work is so visceral and so emotional. You know, for me, this remains a very alive question. I mean, how much of you directly is in this work?
Well, I think everything there is absolutely directly from me, but it might not even be immediately in that moment somehow. So it's weird because I totally understand what you're saying, you know, and nobody really should worry about me.
Good to know.
That much. Well, maybe some of you should, but again, it's that we've all had these experiences, and I'd rather just have them out than in. So,
well, this is interesting because this goes on to something that I was interested in about the secrets and lies and what, you know, if you're willing to admit, help me, or don't go, and these absolutely kind of cries for help, then there's so much that's obliterated and obfuscated. So you kind of think, if this guy's willing to make that public, what's he keeping back? What's he wanted to tell and then taken away again? And it's that kind of is very interesting to me, and it's that thing about the desire to communicate not necessarily entailing the ability to do so.
Yeah, and to sort of feed that into what Russell was saying, this idea, is it autobiographical or is it fictional? It almost begins as autobiography and then becomes fiction, especially when you do obliterate the you, me, I, like, and it kind of almost becomes like a fictional work. But I hope it comes across in the same way genuine. So there's a strange area where it's kind of inhabiting, because these all absolutely did come from me, but they're also, there's direction, you know, I'm kind of pushing them in some ways, and then, you know, the idea of obliterating stuff is, I don't know, I don't want to give away all my secrets, but I know. Turn those lights back up. But that becomes a big part as well, because it's about that connection about, like, you know, what we do all give away and what we keep back. Mm-hmm. And yeah, to kind of, to be that open to say, there's like some fucked up shit here, but like the most simple thing can be there, you know. So I just want everybody, maybe that just heightens the the feeling, you know, it re-emphasizes something that just says you and me, really as an essential thing for all of us.
Desire for human connection.
Yeah. Well, like you said in some notes when we were going over them, you know, what was it? The ability to communicate.
Communicate does not always
The desire to communicate
does not always entail the ability to do so yet.
This reminds me of an incident I had with you several years ago, that we were in your studio and we were looking at some drawings you were showing me. And, you know, there was similar content like the text ones that are here on the wall. And I looked at you, and I realized this is through my own veil of profession. I looked at you and I said, "Are you depressed?" And you said, "What do you mean?" As if that was totally a foreign idea, totally like a foreign idea that I would do that. And what that was for me was a very big aha moment. Weird that I would have an aha moment since I spent a lifetime putting aha moments over there, but I had this very aha moment. And I understood that what you had done was you had engaged me with that text. You had really engaged me with the emotion of that. That was maybe not what you were feeling at the time that you wrote that, but you figured out how to portray that would have involved me in a deep way.
Which then actually, yeah, and then that actually means that it's almost like taking autobiography and making it fiction,
exactly.
and deliberately making it fiction. But it's kind of important for me to sort of clarify that it's not done in any kind of
Cynical
like a con. Yeah, it's honest. All of these feelings are honest and earnest, and yeah. I'm trying.
Well, there's something, this is interesting talking about mental health, but there's been a subtle shift in language in a couple of pieces, because in the past there's been a very obvious kind of language of despair and kind of frustration, I think. But there's a couple of things in the show which seem to point towards acceptance or tolerance, or kind of an acceptance of an unseen bigger picture.
Or defeat.
Maybe defeat. I don't know, but it's definitely, you know, use me and what was the other one? No to let go in particular, I think is a really important one, because it does, there is acceptance in that. And I wonder if you wanted to talk about that, if that feels like a kind of valid thing to say.
I don't know. Maybe I've just worked through some of my issues.
See, there we go.
You know, maybe I'm just taking my foot off the gas a little bit, or maybe I'm just getting older, which obviously I am. But I think that acceptance is definitely there, and the gentler language, in a way, kind of coming in again, maybe also counterbalances and reinforces the more desperate language.
And it's interesting that you say counterbalances, because I think there's in the surface of the panels, kind of dented, scratched and scotched, and there is still that sense of trauma almost as well. So having this kind of softer language combined and kind of exacerbated in a way by these surfaces is very interesting to me, that kind of conflict, if you like.
Well, Russell was talking about like the kind of visceral kind of element of it all, and you know, it's kind of important to me that you see that there's labor involved, as well as just, you know, there's actual physical labor. And when I was making the panels, I had them in the studio, and it was kind of limited space. So again, this is just a bit of background about how these were actually physically made. So the panels all arrive in one chunk, and then it's just me slapping paint on panels to begin with, to get them primed. And, you know, I don't regard myself as a painter. I don't really make what I would call paintings. And you can talk about this in a minute, because more than anybody else, probably except Fergus, you actually saw them develop and become what they are. So physically, every day, I would be in the studio working on them, and I had that freedom at the beginning, knowing that at the end, I wanted you to be able to look at them and see that there was layers and layers and layers. And again, that thing where if you really look at them, you can see that there's an entirely different, let's just call it a painting, but there's an entirely different painting underneath what you're seeing. So again, this other layer. So it allowed me to kind of have a bit of fun and let them run wild a bit.
Well, Gary, I mean, you know, you said you're not really a painter, but, you know, these are actually quite painterly, and you know, there's clearly, I think, a kind of pleasure in that painterliness too. And I'm wondering, you know, if there was a point at which the, you know, what we called earlier the visceral emotional content got kind of, you know, overtaken by the pleasure of painting, or the, you know, where at a certain point you're like, fuck you, or fuck us both, or whatever, yet at the same time you're really enjoying putting this paint on, and then it's kind of almost overtaking the angst.
Yeah, again, that kind of, they fought and fought with me to be paintings, and you know, I had to negotiate every kind of day as the clock was ticking as well. But there's a couple in particular that, if we're kind of wandering around later, where you'll just see these like slash marks and paintings, and you know, you can decide for yourself what certain influences may be in there or not. But there's a thing about, and I don't want to make this about the integrity of work or anything like that, but there's actually a really nice thing about getting your hands dirty, especially when you're really enjoying it. So yeah, definitely that was another element, and it was also something that I knew that I could fall back on in the days where there was like, you know, there would be certain weeks where I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing? This is just, I may as well just pack it in. I don't know, you know. I'm prone to those moments. But I knew I could cheer myself up, or I could get myself rolling again. And also that fun of being able to sort of say, you know what, there's another few weeks, there's another couple of months, slap it on and know that I'm probably going to paint it out anyway, because I realized to get these layers of what's going on underneath there, the best way to do it was to make the layers. Was just to do it.
Now, talking about things that keep you going, and kind of things that you kind of go back to, I wondered if about the language of the signs and the ciphers, and wondering about the crosses, the love hearts, the lucky 13s, the failed patterns, the lightning bolts, and I kind of wondered, do these appear? Are these things that you kind of revert to when language kind of runs out, when text is no longer appropriate, or feels kind of like it's not saying enough or not profound enough?
Well, especially what I kind of call the failed pattern series of drawings. I don't know if there's actually any over there, but there's some that appear on panels. I made this series of drawings, and they're particularly the ones that I fall back on when I feel like I've got nothing to say, or there's just other things aren't working out. I'll go back to this and I'll make what I call these failed pattern drawings, which, again, I started making these just out of having something to do in the studio, because I figure I'm going to go to the studio every day, I'm going to do something. I can't just like sit around. If nothing's happening, that makes me more, you know, it makes me more agitated, so I'll keep my hands busy. So I started trying to draw a perfect diamond shape pattern, the kind of thing that, you know, many years ago would probably be done by hand for decoration or for whatever. These days, anything you wanted to print like that, it would be mechanical. So I said, well, what if you can make the hand mechanical again? Whatever, that doesn't even matter. But I couldn't do it. So, and of course it drives you crazy. And I realized there would be mistakes here and there. And at a certain point I realized, the mistakes make the thing interesting. It makes it move in a certain way. So it became an interesting thing to fall back on and to do. But then I end up sitting wondering when I'm going to make the deliberate mistake. So now the drawings become what I was trying to avoid. So again, it's like another psychological trick that I'm playing on myself, like having to find all these 13s just to kind of keep me going. So again, not to use there's that fragmented, tight, meticulous, tight, because these number collages take so long to actually gather the amount that you need, and to sit and compose them is really intense. And then you just have a sentence scrawled or a text piece that's kind of like, so.
There are these recurring Sisyphean things that go on in the work, with the failed patterns, the 13s. I mean, particularly there's another piece where Gary's trying to collect 1,984 copies of 1984, but you can't buy any of them, is that right?
Yeah,
they've got to be gifts.
I set the parameters that it has to pass through someone else's hand to collect 1,984 copies of the Orwell book, 1984. But they have to have passed through someone else's hand, so I can't just go to a warehouse and buy boxes of these. I'm allowed to buy myself second-hand copies from, second-hand shops or wherever. I'm allowed to receive gifts as long as somebody. So, actually, why don't I just send someone to the warehouse to buy the copies? But again, and it's one of these things that you don't really want to see completed, like some ideas are better just as the idea, and when the idea is like that good, you don't actually maybe need to make the work. But I kind of tend to want to make the work. And if it's something that can't be finished, that tickles me. Yeah.
But is there something Sisyphean just to go back to the painting, in that, you talk a lot about, putting things down and then it gets painted over, and it's really evident looking at the panels that there's a lot that's been painted over. And, I'm wondering if, that's related to what Dougie was saying about the, a Sisyphean element in your work where you're giving yourself these things to do and then sort of not so much failing at them as being forced back from them, and you could spend the whole day obviously putting something on these panels, and then either at the end of the day or the next day you're in there and you're taking it all out, you're obliterating it, and it's either starting over or not starting over. I mean, is it a bigger thing that goes through all of your work?
I think it goes through there. I don't know how kind of as a thing, as a conscious thing for me it is, but yeah, it definitely goes through the work. Like, and I'll sit and make like the same text drawing like 10, 12 times. And especially recently I've been making these drawings where I just erase the text again. So I've been drawing in pencil. And like most lefties, I kind of draw like this. So to draw with a pencil is actually a kind of nightmare for me if you're trying to keep it nice and clean and neat. So I started erasing the little smudge marks, and I just started erasing the text and writing the text back in. So then again, so the layers that I've been pouring into this are now turning back round on themselves and coming back into this kind of scale of work. And that might just be another way to facilitate what I'm kind of trying to say, like giving it, taking it back, giving it, taking it back. And maybe that is looking again for a response from the viewer or the potential reader who, I don't know. What do you think?
What were you aware? This is something I didn't ask you when I had seen the paintings in your studio. Were you aware at any point when you were painting something out? Since you've been talking about this question just came to mind. I painted something out. I went on and I turned around and I thought, it was the instantaneously like, oh shit, why did I paint that out?
Yeah.
Did that ever happen?
Yeah, it did. And initially there was a couple of accidents like that. And I said, well, what the fuck am I going to do now? I'll never be able to get that one pencil line like that again. It's done, it's gone. So what do I do now? And then as we kind of as I kind of went further down in the project, I was like, what if I did just, that really beautiful part of that looks great? What if I did just sort of go and sort of drink a beer and come back and be like, it's gone, and maybe come back the next day, or just have that feeling of like, oh, fuck, it's gone. I could have stopped myself 2 seconds ago. So yeah, and again, that's just this thing of like giving yourself more work to do, to keep yourself busy, to keep moving. And what you were saying earlier, I know I never really addressed it, but the idea like there's a lot of trash bags in here, and there's kind of...
Yesterday when we were going round, Russell asked my favourite question, what's in the bags? And I love the bags. I think they're fantastic because...
The actual physical bags.
Because they are really ominous in a strange way, but also funny. Yeah. And there is that kind of threatening nature to them. There's, if you see something, say something. There's that kind of idea. And so I just wanted, I didn't know where they'd come from.
I'd need to really think about where they came from. But I'll tell you in a minute. But what's in the bags? A friend of mine was here looking at the show last week. Like it was his first chance to get over here, and he texted, "What the fuck are in these bags?" And I just texted back, "Sorrow." And
this is the same thing we were saying earlier. Putting something in some way that it draws you in, that you're not expecting that, but all of a sudden you're hooked. So he's now home looking through his garbage, trying to find his sorrow.
Try to find the sorrow. You just tie it up, put it out in the street, and magically some men come and take it away.
Back up all your troubles.
And But I like the bags because they are sinister and they're funny, and I think there's a lot of that in the work because there is humour in the work. And like we probably all know, humour's hard to do. It's hard to not over-egg it. It's hard to kind of get it right, I think so anyway, without it just being like
also, there's that
goofy.
Oscar Wilde thing of saying, if I accuse somebody of not having a sense of humour, I impugn their seriousness. And it's like you can't be a serious person or look at the world in a serious and balanced way without humour.
How could you?
Yeah, it's impossible.
How could you? And I don't want to get too overtly into any kind of political thing, but the titles of the bags are called "If You See Something, Say Something," which is those, this constant fear that we're all in constantly with the word of terror that they want to drop on us constantly. And, it comes from a poster in the subway that's basically just telling you to be alert, like those fucking audio things that they play constantly that just drives you mad, which of course entirely relates to I'm going to start on 1984 now. I'm not going to start on 1984. That's a whole different DVD. That'll be out in time for Christmas. Anyway, but yeah.
No, but that's going through, if you see something, say something, that's a specific location. That's about location, that's about here. And the show is called Between Glasgow and New York. So, and it feels very much New York. You've got, dive bar stalls, you've got neons, you've got the trash bags, it feels like New York. So I was wondering, as a Glaswegian and as somebody who lives between Glasgow and New York, where does Glasgow fit in? Because it seems like between Glasgow and New York wins.
I've got to tread carefully now.
You're all from Glasgow, so
I know, but it's you I'm scared of. Yeah, I was born in Glasgow, but I moved to New York in 1998, and I've lived in Brooklyn since 1998. I go home and I see my family a couple of times a year if I can. My family come here to visit me. My dad came over for the opening, which was really quite sweet. But I don't feel that I'm a kind of Glasgow artist, because it's such a big phenomenon. And I say Glasgow artist like in parenthesis because there's a list of those. Yeah, exactly. But I am an artist from Glasgow, so I've not really abandoned where I'm from. I spent the first like 26 years of my life in Glasgow. Went to the art school there, did my master's there, but my whole art career has actually been spent in New York, so it's definitely more of an influence.
There is a kind of embrace of, don't really want to call it the abject, but a kind of embrace of sort of miserableism, and you know that feeling that you expressed of. Yeah, well,
do you have any evidence of that?
The evidence is all around us, and you know, and you expressed it yourself, that feeling of, you know, many days thinking, well, I should just pack it in, I've got nothing, you know, and it's something that, you know, I think in general in the US, people are very reluctant to, you know, the epithet quitter is a really negative one here, and whereas people in Britain are always thinking about quitting and talking about it, and you know, and it doesn't have the same sort of stigma attached to it in a way. And you know, I think there is, you know, even after all these years, maybe something from Glasgow in these two. You know, I mean, some of these even, you know, I mean, you know, we can think about Twombly in relationship to these works, but you know, an artist who in many ways is like totally different from you would be David Shrigley, and there's almost a bit of Shrigley in some of these, you know, and in Shrigley's world it's always raining, you know, you've always just lost your job, you've always just been dumped, and he treats it with a more overt humor. We were just talking about humor, but you know, that strain of, you know, of pessimism does seem quite Glaswegian.
I think it is, and I'm totally not denying that influence or the kind of Glasgow, you know, which also comes like that pessimism and miserableism. As you know, the sense of humor in Glasgow is ruthless. Yes. You know, you just like you could get eaten alive. You know, and I'm not saying that's particularly unique to Glasgow. It does seem particularly harsh there, But yeah, so I totally acknowledge that, and like we were speaking about history a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, and it is history, you know, and it makes me think, well, you know, maybe now it's, because I always wonder, well, what if I came from Birmingham? What if I came from Lyon? What if I came from Dusseldorf? Would I just still make the same kind of work? Would I still, maybe Dusseldorf, but you know, but who relates more to the work? You know, people from Glasgow would relate more or not. I mean, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but that's kind of interesting. But the history's always there.
Yeah.
And it's not like I feel there's a conflict between Glasgow and New York. I feel that the two coexist, but I do feel that conflict is an ongoing theme in the work. I kind of think it's central, and I think it kind of has been central for a long time. And it's not a battle between the abstract notion of good and evil, but it's the internal, smaller conflicts that we all kind of deal with on a daily basis between optimism and pessimism and endeavour and indolence and misanthropy and love for humanity and all of these things, and frustration, and you know, it's kind of, we have these conflicts going on constantly, and I feel like that's comes through in the work a lot.
Yeah, I feel it's, and because that's kind of the way I feel, actually. You know, it's, yeah, I'm more kind of into the, almost like the footnotes of the big good and evil. I'm like, well, what makes you good and what makes you evil? And, you know, I'm more into the subcategories, I guess.
And also the kind of the things that can coexist, like the profound and the flippant. That's where the kind of beautiful and the humour kind of coexist as well. But they still have
like the miserableism and the humour, you know. And it's a driving force. The kind of like, you know, because at this point it's the only way I can see how to work through certain things is to just
But I wonder if they coexist so continuously, so constantly, are they really in conflict, or are they just really part of the whole?
Yeah, but that's what's interesting to me, you know, that it kind of makes up a whole.
But the whole of it, ebb and flow.
Monday's different from Tuesday, Wednesday's different from those two, but at the end of the week they make up a week or something, you know. So it's that kind of notion to me, like we all.
Thank God it's Friday.
Thank God. There we go.
So I'm just going to circle back to the Glasgow thing, because I just remembered there's one drawing that says, I want to come home. Not I want to go home, but I want to come home. And I just want to know.
Well, and there's also in one of the panels it says, I'll never go back.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to. So there's that conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's
You live a lot of the time in Glasgow, much
I know
more.
what
You're
it's
there a
like.
lot more than me. That's kind of what it is. I want to come home, and I get there, and I'm like, never coming back. But I don't even know that for sure.
Personality connected to it. I want to come home could be almost any way you see it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
I'll never go back. That's some sort of greater.
That's a bit more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we definitely touched on this earlier on, but I kind of wanted to know why toilet stalls, and specifically, was it a comment on privacy and vulnerability, and stripping these things of their privacy by dragging them into a gallery? And is that some kind of comment on the fact that we are all complicit in abdicating our privacy to somebody else, you know, and just being constantly available, if you like?
Well, I'll work backwards on that. It's like, you know, the idea that we all have these and I don't want to dwell on that and make it something else, but you never really stop working anymore. Nobody does, because you can be gotten all the time, and you know, and then there's things like Instagram, and you're constantly checking, and I don't even know what I'm looking for half the time when I pull my phone out. I'm just like, oh, did something happen somewhere? Did somebody? Yeah, exactly.
But it's just like that is like a big toilet wall, you know.
Yeah, it's
People drawing
exactly
on,
a
you
big
know.
toilet wall. You know, I'm like, did somebody somewhere think about me? Let me check. Yeah. But so the answer's always no. But so there's that kind of posting, and the idea of, you know, obviously we've got to kind of talk about, or we're not going to talk about it, in fact, but we've got to acknowledge graffiti. But more the kind of graffiti that people write in toilet stalls, rather than like the elaborate kind of, you know, decorative tags and stuff like that. Like these little, usually one sentence or one little fevered drawing that they've made for either their own benefit or the titillation of others, or some desperation thing, you know. So again, I acknowledge that, although that's not as prevalent anymore. So those are understood and acknowledged. To go back to why it's toilet stalls, was I physically wanted to see, with the drawings being, you know, you can hold the drawing, you oversee the drawing physically. What if the drawings could pop up and come back at you, like I said earlier? And I thought, well, there is that idea that now that we're entirely on camera and under surveillance, like every minute of our lives, basically, whenever you're in public life, the only time you're not on camera is when you go to the bathroom somewhere, like in a museum, in a bar, in a restaurant, you know. So I also acknowledged that, but I wanted to use the toilet stalls because they just seemed like physically the best solution to making a maze. You know, and I'm utilizing them in a totally different way, so we had to develop this system where they could hang and stand just on legs connecting to each other and also supporting the weight. So that's basically why it was toilet stalls. Because initially, speaking about this idea, I was imagining like 2x4s with plywood panels. How do we do that? And that kind of seemed a bit more, I don't know, cumbersome or awkward. And I really like this gap that you get in between the leg. It kind of adds. The toilet stall's over here in the corner. There's 4, and it's an enclosed cube, and you can kind of peek in and see. So again, it's playing with this. You see all this stuff that's exposed. So why is this one in particular closed off?
And that goes back to the why are these particular words obliterated, and why
Exactly.
we're not getting that secret.
Yeah. So it's just kind of, you know, and it's a labyrinth, and you go through it, and you know, you encounter it your way. But there's a psychological space being created physically. The same way if you stand in front of the wall of drawings, you'll make up your narrative, how your eye travels. But these are a bit more. Plus, there's a lot of space to fill up here.
There's a lot. I think we're kind of running over. So before we take any questions, just one more thing that I want to talk about. With the panels being layer upon layer upon layer, are they finished? Do you feel they're finished? Are you tempted sitting here looking at them to go, oh, I could just scratch out that word, or I could just add to that? Do you feel like they are absolutely complete?
So we all have a hear about this. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sure Russell would have me paint them all out and tell me I would enjoy doing it. No, it's hard because, you know, there's been friends from out of town and stuff who have kind of said, I want to come, I'm going to come and see the show, like, meet me over there and we'll go for a beer. So I've kind of been back since the opening a few times. And of course, every time I come over, I'm like, I've got a pen somewhere, you know? But we're on camera all the time, so I'd probably be in trouble for defacing the artwork. Yeah, but they're kind of, so that quote, when we were kind of having a talk yesterday, so it was Da Vinci that said, an artwork can never be completed, it can only be abandoned. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but so that's how I feel. Maybe I just...
You feel like comparing yourself to Leonardo da Vinci.
Exactly.
I think that's
Have you seen my
a perfect way to
helicopter?
leave it. That's
You
great.
seen my flying machine?
So, well, that's great. I think does anybody have any questions for anybody? Yes.
Hi.
I'm intrigued by the intensely personal relationship that you have with the individual works. You talked a lot about the I and me in the works. And you did discuss a little bit that other people might see them and have a different personal relationship or a different response to them. And while you mentioned process, that your process is visible, it seems like your stimulation is always objects or things or experiences that you see in the abstract in a static way. And I'm wondering, because you use words, if you're ever trying to communicate either directly with an individual member of your audience or a group of people, or if you even think about an audience when you are communicating to anybody as an object of your work.
Well, I think it is that thing that it's more important that the content kind of transcends that it's formal. It transcends like the absolute me to you thing. Although this is going to be difficult to describe, but that immediacy, that personal thing, it's great for me if the viewer feels that I am absolutely directly speaking to them. But at the same time, I want it to be, you know, open-ended, that if someone comes, they could feel that it was someone else that they know talking directly to them. So to create that kind of directness in the way that it's everybody's directness, I don't really know how to explain that any.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's clear to me.
Is it?
We're
I
both
don't know.
from Glasgow.
Okay. But you know what I mean? It's kind of like, you know, you and, like what I was saying about you and me, like, that's everybody. It's just you and me, but it's just you and me. you know, so you can kind of, if you get the tone of voice right, and I think the drawings do have tone, like a tone, and if you can kind of get that right and create that intimacy, but still retain the notion that anybody can get in. That's it's like
it's open-ended. It's like a microcosm of the bigger picture almost as well.
It's like a private club, but everybody's invited.
That's a really nice way to put it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be expecting your membership dues. Anybody else? I'll just say one more thing then.
You're allowed.
And I'll be really quick about it, sorry. So another thing that I wanted to get to is, I think when you come up and in a way, you know, rather than it being the environment that we're in, rather than it being an entirely immersive, kind of enclosed installation, say like a Mike Nelson or the Kabikoffs or something, actually, you know, because obviously as I'm making the show, I've been thinking about all these things. I think for these, it's more like a set, like a theatrical, there's a kind of theatricality here. And I was thinking a lot about it, obviously thinking about this talk. And I feel that these are kind of like a set for a play or, you know, some drama. And maybe the drama has played out already and the drawings are clues to what happened. Or maybe it's about to be played out and the drawings are prompts. I don't know. So hopefully if we take another look around, you can make up your own psycho-melodrama as you go.
Let's do that.
Thank you.